Get a mic?
We'll have to have a mic.
All right. Well, that might not be a bad deal, brother.
There you go.
All right. Is that better? June is shaking her head, so we know we're better, sister. What a privilege it is to come to you tonight. Let me give you a brief bio of who I am. My name is Shane Dotson. I'm the pastor at Fellowship Baptist Church in Baxter Springs. I've been the pastor 8 years, been a member there, either as a member, a deacon, as a pastor. It'll be 34 years in August. So I have spent my majority of my adult life at Fellowship, and I spent 30 years in law enforcement. I spent the last 13 years of my career at Joplin PD, where I was the jail commander. And as part of my leadership role at Joplin, I was involved in all of the training and all the different things that we were doing. And obviously, when churches become targets, we begin to shift our resources at our agency to go and help churches in Joplin. There's a lot of churches, there's a lot of big churches in Joplin. So we would go out and give them our insight, give them our experiences. Then what I did, I brought our experiences back to our church. And what I'm going to share with you tonight works for Fellowship Baptist Church in Baxter Springs, Kansas. It depends on my resources, depends on my church staff, it depends on our budget. There's so many extenuating circumstances, but my hope is tonight to give you a general idea of where we need to be as churches. The first thing I'm going to tell you, I'm coming to you as a pastor, first and foremost. Faith always wins over fear. I am not here to create fear and concern for you, because whatever is going to happen in our church is going to be under the permissible hand of God. There has been people killed in churches. Could have God have stopped that? Absolutely, he could have. But for whatever reason, God chose not to. I lived the hailstorm of May 11, 2011 of Joplin PD's tornado. I was in the midst of that storm. I've seen what it's like. God could have curtailed all of that. He chose not to. But what we talked about this morning in my church, in the tornado, there was 163 people that died. We know beyond a shadow of doubt there could have been thousands more. Joplin High School's graduation was that day. They had it at Missouri Southern, away from Joplin High School. Joplin took a direct hit. The high school did. It destroyed Joplin High School. 3,000 people were there. So I'm not going to create fear. We're going to trust our faith. But I believe God gave us common sense. God gave us due diligence to be proactive in helping protect our people. And my job here tonight is to help you. How many different churches we have here, Clarence? We have any idea? Several churches, right? Take what I say, take it to your leadership. If your leadership, take and do with it as you pray about it, as God leads you to do it. But I'm going to share what I know has worked for us. I've had the guy come into my church, crazy, methed out of his head. I've had women come in with withdrawals right in the middle of Sunday morning services. And I'm blessed. I have retired law enforcement in my church. I've got men in my church who take care of those things, so as their pastor, I don't have to. Am I capable and able? Absolutely I am. But I'm blessed I have men of God that take care of that for me. And my church people feel safe. We had one about 3 weeks ago. The guy come in dancing into our church, and we're good Baptists. We don't dance. If you're Baptist, you can laugh at that. Right? But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring some insight. I'm going to bring some general direction of what works for us. And hopefully you can garnish something, glean something off of all of that. We will have a time for question and answering. And by any means, I'm not a world-renowned expert. If I don't know, I would tell you I don't know. But there's a better chance we can probably figure it out tonight. So I am probably one of the few preachers that packs a weapon. I carried in my Bible. And I have a loaded weapon in this Bible. I never go to the front of the pulpit without it. Because my church is set up like most every church in America. I'm the first line of defense for you. If something happens tonight, where's Scott? Scott's here. I'm going to see, I've got the doors right here in my peripheral, right? I'm your first line of defense. And I'm prepared to do whatever I need to do to protect you. As I am in my church, because when I see them walk through the doors of fellowship, I'm the first one that sees them. If there's a threat, I carry a weapon. There's people who struggle with that, and I'm sorry, but don't struggle with it. Because God has given me a talent and an opportunity to protect his people. And I will do it in the blink of an eye. because I believe that's what God wants us to do, is protect his people the best we can. The big thing that I think a lot of our churches in this community, and when I say this, I'm talking about Baxter, Riverton, Galena, Chatopa, we're small communities. You know, we have very little resources, but let's capitalize on the resources that we do have. And I'm going to make recommendations tonight that you spend money. Spend it wisely, but I'm going to give you a quick testimony. It has nothing to do with active shooters. It has nothing to do with any of that. About 10 years ago, I get a phone call from the KBI. That's the Kansas Bureau of Investigation in this great state. They said, we need to talk to you, Pastor. So what's going on? They gave me a name of a member in my church. He taught Sunday school. I said, obviously, I'm very familiar with this gentleman. We're investigating him for pedophilia, for child abuse, sexual child abuse. At that point, I had 20-some years of law enforcement. I'd never dealt with that. We dealt with it as we should have. Law enforcement did what they needed to do, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He has since passed away because of that. But we had to reevaluate what we were doing as a church. And I brought this to, we were in Centalapa, 3 years ago, Clarence? I brought this to the Mexican churches down there. What we did to protect our kids the best we could, and we had no idea, we had no pre-warned knowledge. I can assure you, had I had any indication, that would have been addressed long before that problem ever became a problem. What we did, we cut every door we had in that church. We cut a hole in it and put windows in it. There's not one place you can go in my church that you can't see into every classroom, every closet, anything that anybody could ever go into. What that did, that set us in motion for what we're doing now in our church security and safety of our church. So the question is, what happens when you have that individual come into your church that is distraught, that is maybe spun up on methamphetamines, maybe going through severe withdrawals, maybe severe hallucinations? The list, Scott, is never ending, is it not, of what I saw and dealt with on the streets for 30 years. Those, the same people that I deal with, are the same people that come into our churches. So the question is, how do we deal with those? And how we have addressed it at our church is we lock our church down except for one door, and it's locked. But we have a north door into our children's area, into our gymnasium and our children's ministry and youth. We have a south entrance that comes into our adult Sunday school area, my office area. And we have a west door that's the main entrance into our church. So what we did, we lock our church completely down. Now we have two men that sit out in the foyer. We have a camera in our sound room, back like it is here. And anybody approaches that door, they see who it is. Then at that point, we make the determination to open that door. We have yet to never open that door. But the two men that sit back there are prepared to deal with whatever that situation may be. The problem we ran into is during Sunday school, we're open campus. People are not, I don't know about you, but our church have a hard time showing up on time for Sunday school. You know, we start at 9:45, they'll drag it at 10:05, 10:10. We got to let them in the church. It's their church. So we leave it open. Most of our problems has come during that time. But we have two men. We have our guy in our sound room is armed. The two men that sit out in our foyer are armed. There's men in our church that are sitting in the congregation around me that are armed. I know who they are. Our church people know who they are. We're not trying to hide anything from anybody. But we had an incident 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 now, I don't know. The guy come in dancing. And before it got too far, the two men that sit in the back of the church addressed him, spun him around, and asked him to walk out the sanctuary, and they've dealt with him back in Fellowship Hall. He left. A week later, our praise and worship team is doing their praise and worship. I'm back in my office preparing for Sunday morning worship. The same gentleman comes back for the second time. He is well known to our church family. His parents have been members of our church for 40 years. I've watched this kid grow up. I had this kid in jail. I've had my jail staff had to fight this guy when he came into jail because of his drug addiction and all of his hallucinating characteristics that he had. I'm in my office. I get a text message from our praise and worship team. We've got a problem. I come in to pray, and it's just my praise and worship. It's all that's up there. Everybody else is in Sunday school. And he is spun out of his mind. I go up, I address him, I escort him out of the church and tell him that he is not welcomed until he can properly address and properly be himself to come into our church, because it was making our people nervous and was frightening them, as it should have. I'm different. I'm a 30-year law enforcement veteran, Scott. I know how to deal. I know how to de-escalate people. I did it in the jail for 13 years. I can de-escalate situations. I was trained to do that. Not every church has that privilege, but there's training out there that you can learn de-escalation skills. I'm sure Scott could probably find some for you. We did it over in Joplin for churches. We had our chaplains would come in and teach them de-escalation training. I will come and teach de-escalation training for you if you need somebody to. I taught my jail staff. I taught other agencies in the jail world, but you know what? It's all the same. A guy spun up on meth or a woman spun up on meth is a woman on meth or a man on meth. It don't matter whether it's in Chautauqua or Joplin or Baxter or wherever it may be. But so anyway, we have every room, every window is visible in our church. We have one camera at our west door. But what we made a decision to do financially is we put panic buttons in every room in our church. Every Sunday school room, every youth room, anywhere that there was going to be anybody, our kitchen, our hallways, and it's a simple panic button. You hit it, it sounds the alarms in the church, it notifies Baxter PD immediately, and we know that we have a problem. And we know where the problem's at because our system tells us where youth or nursery or, adults, wherever it may be, we've got them labeled. Our biggest fear is our children. Because here's what, I don't know if you've had this experience, I have here and in Alabama, is parents going through a divorce. Mom brings children to Sunday school and church with her. Dad ain't a real big fan. So dad comes into the church to get his kids. That's why we have panic buttons. Because we have people in our church at that moment that are prepared to respond to that situation. So we have our panic system. We have our one camera. We just voted today in our business meeting to expand our perimeter cameras of our church, not for safety and security, but because people are stealing our stuff. Right? They stealing our air conditioners and our copper out of our air conditioners. Right? They're taking the catalytic converters off our church buses and off our vans. So we've done that to be proactive in trying to protect our assets. But the thing is, we've got to be prepared now to deal with what potentially could come. This is what, to me, tonight is a preparation for you to begin to think about your church, how you're laid out, how you're set up. Who can respond in your church? How many have had that thought since we've been talking of the people that you think can respond in your church to these situations? First and foremost, I know the pastors. I don't know. I know one. I know what Clarence would do. Brother, I assume I know what you would do. Because what is it Christ says? No man has greater love than he that's willing to lay down his life for a friend. I'm more than okay with that. And I believe all of us in the church are, because that's what we've been called to do. But it's getting preemptive in your training and how you're going to de-escalate those situations where it does not become chaos in your church during your time of worship. Because that's what Satan is wanting to do. It's to bring chaos into our churches. And he has a multitude of avenues which he can do that. And oftentimes it's going to be those that are strung out on methamphetamines or typically heroin addicts and stuff like that. They're not spun up like meth is typically for us. How much meth do you guys see around here, Scott? A lot, I'm sure. We're seeing it massive amounts in Baxter. Every day I see people on the streets. We have meth addicts in our church who've been recovered for 3 or 4 years and are now part of our church family. They came to us spun up on meth, but they wasn't disrupted. They sit in church spun up on meth. We welcome those people in our church. As you can tell, I showed up in your church in shorts and a golf shirt. We believe in come as you are. So we don't know who's walking through that door. We welcome all until it's apparent that it's a problem, then we'll deal with it. But we don't make any preemptive decisions. Because people walk in my door all the time of our church that is anything but what you would call church people. But those are the people that we want. Those are the ones that need Jesus Christ. So that's who we are targeting right now, is those publicans and those sinners that need Jesus. So they're going to come in on drugs. They're going to come in reeking of alcohol. We're okay with that in our church because we are prepared to deal with them if we need to. And typically we don't have problems with them. They'll come in, sit down, they'll make it through church service, and they'll leave. And they'll come back. And eventually they come back sober, or they come back off of meth, at least long enough to comprehend the Word of God anyway. So you as a church, you need to decide, first of all, we have a safety and security team in our church. We're good Baptist. Clarence, we have a committee for everything. That's how we roll at the Baptist church, and I'm okay with that. Because I've got a safety and security team. I'm not even a part of it. I'm the pastor. I'm not a cop anymore. I leave that to our safety and security team. If they have questions, I'm a resource. But typically, I've got one that's a retired 30-year law enforcement veteran as well that's on my team, and he does a great job. So we have 4 people on that committee, on that group that meet. We got 3 men and 1 ladies. Do not omit your ladies, gentlemen, please. Right. They see things different than we see things. And if you've been married very long, you understand that. Amen? Right? Including because they have different perception, they have different visions, they see things differently. So I found it very important to have ladies on those type of committees because they see things that we as guys can't see. So my first recommendation is developing within your churches a safety and security team. What I'd be willing to do is come look at your church and come do an assessment. Right now, how many people are from this church, if you don't mind? I'm not trying to make you look weak at any level. All right, if we have an active shooter come through this door, where are we going? I'm going right there where it says exit. Right, but you know what? Not every church has that in the front of their sanctuary. We have 2 in our front of our church, but they're behind 2 other doors that most of our church people probably don't even know exist. Here, we would get out of here because I have something to fight with. How many of you in this room are armed right now? I like it. We got a lot of firepower right here. Not every church has that. So what we're going to do, men and women that have weapons, we're going to engage. This whole fight and flight deal does not work. What we're going to do, we're going to engage the bad guy or guys or gals, whatever it may be. What are the rest of you going to do as we're engaging? You're going to get out that door as fast as you possibly can. Because I promise you, if we're throwing lead back at the bad guys, where's their focus going to be? They're not going to be on you. They're going to be on us that have the weapons. We're a diversion, so to speak. We're going out that door. So we think about in your church on Sunday morning or Wednesday night, whenever your service or meeting, and you engage an active shooter, where are you headed? You got to get away from the fire, right, Scott? You don't run to it. That's what we do. As cops, we run to the threat. We don't run away from it. But as church people that is unarmed, you got to get away from the threat. Nothing else, get on the ground. If you don't think you can safely get on the ground and let the firefight take place. Because there was 5 or 6 of us in here. I know how many rounds I've got. We've probably got at minimum of 60, 70 rounds. Surely to goodness, guys and gals, we can hit somebody with 70 rounds. Well, I had this mindset when we went to semi-automatic weapons. I started out carrying a revolver, if that tells you how long ago that was. I carried a model 686 Smith & Wesson, had 6 bullets. That was it. At Joplin, I carried a weapon that had 15 rounds in the chamber, in the mag, and 1 in the chamber. I had 16, and I had 45 more on my belt. I had, 61 rounds? I had this mindset. I'm not giving it to my buddy if he blows 61 rounds and he can't hit nothing. I'm going to try to hit him myself, right? But anyway, so if you come in an active shooter in Sunday morning, either get on the ground or hit egress out of the arm's way, and let those that are equipped handle the firefight, right? Because for those of you who are carrying, brother, and I don't pick on people, but what I do want to share with you, When you and I carry a weapon in the house of God, it is meant for one purpose and one purpose only, is to neutralize the threat. It ain't for show. It ain't for any of that. It is to take the target out. I don't know what that looks like, but my whole life I was trained to stop the threat. Read into that what you want to read into that. I know what that means for me. But our job, for those of us in our churches that are packing weapons, one purpose only, that is to stop the threat of God's people. So I want you to really think about that. And the people that within our church that carry weapons, I've had these conversations with all of them. When I'm asking them, are you prepared to take the life of someone else? Because you very well may be called to do that. That is the real world that we live within. If you're carrying a weapon at any point, whether you're in the church or what, I struggle with some of this open carry stuff that I see because most people that carry weapons that I know out in public don't need to be carrying weapons to begin with, right? They scare me because I know who they are. But in the house of God, we've got one purpose and one purpose only. That is to protect God's people, whatever that level may be. And it may be taking the life of someone else. And we're okay doing that. Let me say this, I am okay doing that. Because if I'll do it for a stranger, I'll surely do it for my family. And I'm sure that all of you are like-minded as I am. So as a church, as you have people that are carrying weapons, that are taking care of those things, I hope you're having conversations. And I see all of this because here's what concerns me, Scott, is when you get people together that have never trained together, I don't know what they're going to do. I know how I'm going to respond, but I don't know how the others. So what we do, we train, not live fire train, but we train in how we respond within our church. Because we've got two men sitting over here that are opposite sides of the room from each other. What is my fear? Crossfire. If you haven't been together, if you haven't worked through scenarios, we call it scenario training. What we do is we sit down and we talk about, okay, you get it, an individual comes in from this door, whatever the situation may be. How are we going to respond? Because what we don't want to happen is the crossfire. So that is how we kind of deal with this here, this grouping. What happens if it's Sunday school? Our church is designed, we have two phases. We have a phase that was built in the 80s, which is our main sanctuary, fellowship hall, Sunday school for adults. Then in the 90s, we added on an educational building for children's ministry, for youth, and the gym and all that. If there's something going on in my gymnasium, I can't hear it from my office. We have panic buttons, so I know if the panic button is hit. But what about in your church? What if something goes awry in one of your Sunday school classes? What is your response going to be? I have men in my church and one lady that we've talked about, if it's in a certain area, one or two people respond. All of us do not go to the same area. Because if we all show up in the same area, we could all end up in a very, very bad situation. So we team up typically in twos to go to different parts of that. As a church, you need to think about, if you have a problem, it's easy to dissect and take care of sanctuary, but what happens if it's in your children's church? Because how many of you have children's church going on where you have primary worship and praise going on in the big church, we call it? I think we all have children's church that goes on. For us, it's completely the far north end of our property in the far north building. It's a 2 minute and a half area to get to. So we have people strategically placed to respond to our children's church during our primary time of worship. They know what their responsibilities are. If we have a situation that develops over into our Sunday school, adult Sunday school area, which is over by my office, who is a logical responder to that on Sunday mornings? Myself. Because that is where I am located at that moment in time. So dissect your church. Look at every ministry that you have going on. Sunday mornings, Wednesday nights are like that for us. We have church training union at 6. back in a certain area of the church. We have primary church at 7. We have children's ministry going on. We have Awanas going on. We have youth ministry going on. So we have ministry going on Wednesday nights as well. We've addressed that as well on what our response is going to be. These are all the things. I'm giving you things to think about. And so when you begin to talk about this, and I will come meet with you individually as churches if you would like. But to dissect each area of your church, who is going to respond? Because what we don't know is we could have 2 assailants in our churches. One in our children's area, possibly one in our main primary worship area. We don't know. I hate the what if game, but in these scenarios you have to play the what if game. You know, because there is evil people, more so than there's ever been, I think, walking the streets of our communities today. We need to be prepared for whatever that may be. So begin to dissect your ministries, all the different things that you've got going on Wednesdays and Sundays, and begin to develop a response plan. How are you going to respond if something happens in a wayward part of the church when most of the people's in adult worship? How are you going to respond to your children's ministry? How are you going to respond to your nursery? Our nursery is over in our educational building away from primary worship for us. So that is a constant for us. Our nursery has always been a high priority, as I explained earlier, because you have those parents that separate or divorce and mom or dad ain't real happy. They're going to come, because here's the reality of it, my friends. The world sees Christians as weak people. My favorite saying of all time is, never mistake my kindness for weakness, because we are warriors of the kingdom. And we will protect what is ours and what God has entrusted to us. So that's why the church seems to be an easy target for people, because they see us as docile. They see us as being able to push through us. But it's time for the church to rise up and become the warriors that God has asked us to be. And it breaks my heart that I have to have this conversation with churches and God's people. Because me growing up in the Southern Baptist Church in Pleasant Valley, Alabama, it was our sanctuary. It was the one place we could come and be safe and secure from the world and everything that was going on around us. A lot of you nodding your head because you remember those days. There's a lot of group of kids and people today that don't understand that. But the church has no longer become a sanctuary. It's become a battleground. And we've got to protect what God has built and what God has created for us. And I'm sure if you read the Word of God, God is a big advocate of war. God does not tolerate the unrighteous and the evil. He says, I will destroy the evil, whatever that may look like. Sometimes he may call upon the churches to be those people, as he did back in the time of Moses and Abraham and Joshua on through. I'm not giving you a message, I promise. I won't do that to you on Sunday night. But begin to think about what you're going to do in your church if it's not Sunday morning at 11 o'clock in sanctuary. What if it is in your children's ministry? What if it is in your nursery? Or whatever it is that you've got going on. How are you as a church going to respond? The worst thing we can do is do nothing at all. Because you got your chief right here. Brian Henderson is the new chief in Baxter. Brian retired from Joplin about 8 months ago. I worked with Brian for 13 years. Brian's a great, he was a pastor at Greenwood Baptist Church. I sent that document to you, remember, from Greenwood? I got it from Brian. Brian was a pastor. He is now the chief at Baxter PD. He resigned his pastoral position because of the focus he needed to have as our chief. We have a great agency in Baxter. I love the men and women that serve there tremendously. But 4 minutes ain't fast enough. Because it happens in 45 seconds. Baxter PD, Chautauqua PD would be there as quick as godly possible to get to us. By then, as we all know, most gunfights are over in 2 minutes or less. So we have to respond as a church. You have to respond as a church. I feel I have an obligation to my church family to protect them. And our church family feels we have an obligation to protect each other. So begin to dissect, I'm going to use that word lies, of your church. I'm not asking you to go and cut the windows out of your doors at any level. That was a bonus of another very unfortunate situation in our church years ago. But we invested in panic buttons, and we invested in one camera. I don't have security. We don't have our doors alarmed. We don't have motion detectors in the church. We trust God when we're not there to protect our stuff. That doesn't mean they're not going to come in and take all of our sound equipment tonight, as I've had this conversation. But we're not going to be those people. I've been questioned greatly on why we lock our church down. My question is, why would I not? Because if I can stop the threats coming in all but one place, I have a lot higher probability of success rate than I do if I leave my church open and somebody comes into our north doors and goes straight into our nursery, which is like 22 seconds. If I can prevent that, why would I not? To protect a child or protect one of our nursery workers who's back there taking care of our babies. So my question is, why would I not? We lock our main west door. And once we identify who's at the door, typically what happens, if it's someone unknown to us, our men will walk outside and find out what the situation. Oftentimes they're looking for food, they're looking for gas. They'll meet the need, they'll take care of that. We've got things in place to do that. They'll take care of them and they're off on their way. But what I want to challenge us to think about is when you're having those people that come into your church that is unknown to you, that are there because they need Jesus. What I don't want to do as a pastor is ever decline somebody the opportunity to come to know who Jesus is. They may be, as I said, they may be on meth, they may be reeking of alcohol. But if I remember correctly, Jesus dealt with those people on a daily basis. He dealt with the demons, the demonic, on a daily basis. If Jesus is, so am I. So we got to find the balance as men and women in churches to reach those that need Jesus, but at the same time, keep our people safe. And at fellowship, I think we do a really good job of that. But first and foremost, we put everything in the hands of God. And he takes care of us as he does all this. But that doesn't say next Sunday that you can read about us in the Joplin Globe or on Fox News. It's equally as well. But we're prepared to respond if that should be the case. So that's active shooter. Let's downstep this if we could. And I use this all the time, and I've mentioned it 3 or 4 times already. You have your nursery. How many churches have nursery with little kids in it? A lot of us do. What happens when dad shows up and we have custody orders that mom has primary custody at the moment, that dad has no responsibility, no rights to those child? And dad shows up at our church to get Junior, to take Junior out of the church. Do we have a problem? We have a big problem. So not only are we prepared to deal with the active shooters, we are prepared to deal with those unhappy parents when we refuse to let the children leave, when we know that the parent has full custody of that child. At that point, we've already called Baxter PD, because that is a police matter, but our job is to maintain civilness until they arrive to do what they have been trained and called to do. Scott's guys and ladies have been trained to handle those things. And there's nothing I hate worse than child custody deals. I hated them when I was on the sheriff's department in the state of Kansas. When I went to Joplin, we dealt with them all the time. But how are we going to deal with them in our church? Are you going to let dad take the children away when you know he's a threat? He's got a PFA. Mom has a PFA against dad for her and the children. How are you going to respond to that? How are you going to deal with that? Eventually, Chitopa PD will show up at your church, but you have a period of time that you're going to have to deal with that and try to keep civilness within your church. Because what you don't want to see is, you don't want the other kids to see chaos, where all of a sudden they become scared. There's a lot of moving parts, so you need to think about that. And we've talked about the guy or gal that comes in spun up on meth or on alcohol, who is disruptive to what God is trying to do. How are you going to respond to that? You need to have men and women that understand how to deal with those situations. I couldn't grab somebody in this church who's never dealt with that and expect them to understand how to deal with those dynamics. You need to train, you need to teach your people how to respond to those, because How many of you had those wayward people come in that is disruptive in your church? The chance of having those is far greater than having an active shooter come into your church. The active shooter is worst case scenario. We train for the worst and hope for the best, right? But I will promise you, you will deal with those that are disruptive, that are coming in. We had about 4 years before everything. You notice now everything's pre and post COVID. Back before COVID hit, matter of fact, it was getting ready for Vacation Bible School. We were having church still on Sunday nights. It was a Sunday night. We were still doing regular church back then. So part of our ladies and part of our youth was getting ready for VBS. And I was up front doing my message, and we have double doors in the back of our sanctuary. And I seen this lady walk by. And, that wasn't truly uncommon back then. So I kept on and I didn't think nothing about it. And about 45 seconds later, I seen one of our ladies come in and had this look about me, or to me. So I knew immediately we had a situation going on. So I dismissed myself from the pulpit. And I said, I'll be right back. So I left the people in the church up front, so I go back. And I knew instantly I was dealing with a demonic situation. You ever seen people that's demonic possessed? If you've ever seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about. I get goosebumps talking about it today. Because I was dealing with something I'd never dealt before, but God revealed me very quickly what was going on. So I finally talked her out of the fellowship hall and outside the west door of our church. And her and I began this huge, I don't want to call it a debate, a deal, but I was not talking to her. I was talking to Satan himself. So I did the only thing that I know to do. In the name of Jesus Christ, I remove the demon out of you. Depart. And she instantly calmed. I don't know if the demon left her or not, but I know that she was wherewithal enough that I asked her to leave, and she walked away. It scared my youth and those ladies to death because they seen what I was seeing. They didn't recognize what they were seeing. Satan is going to come into our churches, my friends. If you're teaching and preaching the Word of God, he ain't liking it right now. So he's going to send people into your church to disrupt what God is doing. Be prepared for those that are demonic. Be prepared for those that are drugs, alcohol, whatever it may be. We have, I don't know about Chetopa, we have a huge mental health crisis in Cherokee County, Kansas. We have a huge mental health crisis in Joplin, Missouri. 45% of the people suffer from some form of mental health illnesses. Are you prepared to deal with those people? Because you got to understand, when you're dealing with mental health, you're not dealing with the individual, you're dealing with the disease. Whether they be bipolar, they be schizophrenic, or a combination, or Axis 1 diagnosis. There's so many different things that we have to think about as churches that disrupt and bring uneasiness to the family of God. How are you going to deal with those people? Because as the pastor, every time that we have somebody walk into our churches, that creates that feeling, I can't leave the pulpit. I can't take the Word of God away from what we're trying to accomplish. So we have people, we have trained our people, we have done a lot of training and working with our people to handle those within our church. Trust your people to be the forefront. And if it ever gets to the point, I have no problem doing what I need to do, but I've trusted God has brought me people to handle those on my behalf. Every church is different. Every dynamics, every sanctuary, every group of Christians, Christ-like people in our churches are different. You know your church, Clarence. You know your people. You know the resources, Pastor, that you have before you. Utilize them. Because I know all I've had to do is ask. Brother, sister, this is what God has laid on my heart. Or not even so much that. Mark, you're retired law enforcement. I need you on my safety team. Brother, I'd love to serve. Take the talent, the resources that you have, and begin to develop something that works for you. What I do at Fellowship works for us. It doesn't work, may not work for First Baptist Chetopa. at any level. But you know what? There is something that will. This is Community Bible Church, right, brother? There's something that will work here that doesn't work at Fellowship, or that doesn't work at First Baptist, or wherever you may be a member of, or where you worship at. But tonight, all I want to do is plant the seed to give all of you something to think about. If your pastor is not here from your church, take it back to your pastor. I will be happy to sit down one-on-one or with your church and get really deep. I can't get deep because there's too many different things going on here. But we can get deep individually. Because after I did my church, he is now the chief at Joplin Sloan Rowland, 28 years military, 34 years law enforcement, SWAT commander, all the good stuff. Who do you think I brought in and did the second evaluation for me? I brought Sloan in. Why? Because I felt he was much better than I was. So what I would not bring in the very best, you know. So, but look at your church, look at your people, and begin to formulate a response of what it is that we need to do to keep us as safe as we possibly can. There is nothing that's foolproof. There is nothing that's going to work in every situation. But I believe as churches, if we focus on those things to utilize the resources we do have, I believe God will have his hand in it, and God will put the people where they need to be. Because that's a ministry, just like everything else is. So what is it that you're going to do, what you need to do? That's up to you and your church. There's resources. Scott, how many years you been in this, brother? 22 years. Seen a lot in 22 years, I promise you. Use your local. And I noticed you have a deputy sheriff that lives right over here. Right? See, that's the cop in me. I can't take it out of me. I survey the perimeter before I come in here. I go into a restaurant. You will never see me eating in a restaurant with my back to the door, I promise you. Won't ever happen. I won't eat. I've had arguments with people. I will get up. I will leave the restaurant because I'm not going to sit with my back to the door. Yeah, it's smart. It is for me because I always carry a weapon. So, but I saw the Labette County Sheriff's Department over here. I'm thinking, what a great resource that is for Community Bible Church. You know? So look at your resources. They're everywhere. You know, I know some of the bigger churches in Joplin hired off-duty police officers to come and run security in their churches. I thought that was a little bit aggressive, but hey, that was their call, not mine. But what is it that you're going to do? As I said, my job tonight was to plant the seed. I will help you cultivate if you like. If you have other resources, use those resources. There's a lot of resources out there for you to use. But the thing that I want to talk, that I mentioned earlier, and I want to focus one more time on, is for those of you who raised your hands that were packing, are you prepared to do what is necessary? Because what doesn't need to happen, and I say this with all the love that I possibly can say, is what I don't need in my church is those people that have agreed to protect God's people are not prepared to protect God's people. That's the real world we live in. I had one of our security teams question me. He is no longer at our church, not because of that. He was a Marine and all that, which I love the military. A lot of my buddies are military. They're great officers. But he looked at me, and I've been on the force about 26, 27 years at this point. I've been shot at. I've been looking down the barrel of a Glock twice in my career already. He looked at me going, brother, I don't think you can do what's necessary. I said, what would that be? He said, I don't think you can kill another man. I said, brother, you don't know me very well. When it comes to them or us, they're the easy target for me. And I say that with all the great love because that's something you need to think about. You're carrying a weapon for a reason. It's not to say you're carrying a weapon. It is, are you ready to protect God's people and what he has created? That's harsh as it's meant to be. Because I need to know who's in that church is capable and able to protect what they have been asked to protect. So maybe a little harsh, I'm sorry, but that's just the reality. I'm a black and white guy. I preach it black and white. I live my life black and white. I did it for 30 years. It was black and white for me. But use your resources. God has them in place for you. You just got to find them. The seed has been planted. What you decide to do with it is up to you. I gave you a very, very broad overview because I could spend an 8-hour day on talking about active shooter in that self alone. And dealing with mental health, dealing with drugs and alcohol people. There's just so much. It's such a broad topic that you can't do it in this type of format. But we can do it individually because it's a focused deal. Because oftentimes when I do these, we will spend, it's a 3 or 4 step process. I don't come in one day. We can't do it all in one day. It's impossible to do it right anyway. So, but use your resources that you have here. Use your Labette County Sheriff's Department. I'm sure they would be more than happy to help you as well. There's just so many resources that if you're willing to use them, they're willing and able to come and serve. Because the old slogan, was protect and serve. And it's not about catching bad guys. That's a byproduct of protecting and serving. And if Scott's been doing it for 22 years, he's doing something right. Because typically most guys and gals in this profession, if it ain't in their blood, they're done in about 2 years or less, I would think, Scott. It's what it was at Joplin. Use the resources that you have. They're out there. You just got to ask them to do that for you and with you. Partner with them. So now I'm going to open it up for questions. If I don't know, I will tell you I don't know. But if I do know, I will share with you what I do know. There is no silly question, by the way, because most people hasn't lived in the world that I've lived in for 30 years. Backside of that, not only did I spend 30 years, but my stepfather was the high sheriff in Cherokee County for the majority of my life growing up. So I've been exposed to it 40-some years, and there's nothing quite like living with the sheriff, I can promise you, as a teenager. That's a joy, by the way. Questions, thoughts, clarifications, anything along those lines? Brother.
When you had that issue with the pedophilia and the men in your church, you talked about putting windows in each of the doors, and I think that's a great move. Have you installed any type of background check systems with your workers? Side notes, or sideline question to that, are you doing anything for child check-ins and security when the children are going back for a children's church or something like that during the worship?
Yes, and yes. We've always had background checks done, not only for our children, but for any part of ministry. If you're a Sunday school teacher, if you're a children's worker, nursery worker, we're going to run a background check on you, a comprehensive background check on you. We name tag and track our children as they come and go. But the challenge with that, the background checks, on our pedophilia situation we had background check. Something we've done since then, we were kind of the one and done. We ran a background check, that was good enough, they cleared, it was all as well. And now every 3 years, we run background checks on all of our people, including the pastor. That's the main one. I'm the first one to go and get the background check done. Then we do everybody else that's involved in our ministry. And we do track our children. We track our nursery, our babies. And we kind of have a set rule that whoever brings them is the one that picks them up. Unless they have made prearranged orders or direction beforehand. Maybe grandma's picking them up or something like that. We're flexible, but typically if whoever brings them takes them home with them. Good question, but yeah, we background check every 3 years now.
Do you have a computer program for the check-in system, or what do you guys use for that?
No, we're old school, brother. We're pen and paper. Okay. Sign in, sign out. That's how we do it. Yes, ma'am.
At my church in Las Vegas, they had, I experienced all of that you said, and then some. And I worked in several ministries outreach. So, but for the kids, they had a really sophisticated system to where whomever checked the child in, and it was all computer based. They put a wristband on like the hospital, And under no circumstances at all, if you didn't have the matching one, and even if they knew, like if you're the pastor or the wife, you couldn't get the child without. It costs a couple of,
Well,
but you have to.
it is what it is.
Across the board.
Most of your bigger churches that have lots of resources, they go, I call it the baby ID system. If you go to Freeman Hospital, my sister's a charge nurse in labor and delivery, has been forever. Mama comes in, she gets a wristband with a barcode. When baby is born, baby gets a wristband with a code on it. And guess who the only one that can have that baby is the one that gets scanned? It's that mama. Daddy doesn't have one, nobody has one. So if you have the resources, those scan systems are absolutely the way to go. But unless you have $30,000 or $40,000 laying around in your church budget, you probably do what we do. You go to a pen and paper and you let whoever sign them in and sign them out. We're a small church. It's very easy for us to, I know everybody. I know every child that comes in that nursery. I know the parents. I know the grandparents. That's the benefit of a small church. We know any and everyone that comes in and out, but we still track and still log and do those things, especially especially in our nursery and our young children. But here's the challenge. 90% of our children and our youth come from unchurched homes where mom and dad do not attend. They ride our bus ministry. We pick them up and take them home. But our van drivers and all those, they're background checked, and they have been part of fellowship for a long, long time. But so is our pedophilia guy. And here's the thing, how God works, to mention him ever being attached to Fellowship Baptist Church never made the news, never did anything, because he was a school crossing guard for Baxter Springs School District. Where did the focus go? Went to the Baxter Springs School District. They're the ones that got crucified, not Fellowship Baptist Church. Because we were prepared for that. Because I figured that would have been the top draw, was Sunday school teacher, all of those things that he was, arrested, for sexual abuse of a child. Indecent liberties with a child was actually what he was charged with. And unfortunately, I won't go into that, but it was not a pretty thing. It wasn't for him, nor was it for the church. And we suffered greatly because of that. But anyway, good question.
We have a Wednesday night program here, and we have roughly anywhere between 30 and 50 kids here on Wednesday night. And we take them out here to play on the playground. And that's one of my biggest fears, is that something would happen during that time. Do you have any suggestions, like for playground security? I mean, I definitely we try to watch the kids, make sure. But I have a boy who is estranged from his mother, and this happened not too long ago, actually in this year. And he was out here on the playground, and small town, you know who's who. I knew that she never had anything to do with him, and she pulled up out here and started approaching him. And I went to meet her, to try to counteract the situation. When she saw me coming, she went and got back to me a little left. But do you have anything anything you would recommend?
I do, sister. And here's what I think is the best form of use of resources. If you have that many kids, you probably have several people that are engaged in that program. Put a human barrier around those kids. In the playground, wherever there is, just have 4 or 5 people kind of circling them, watching perimeter, at the same time watching the kids, and just be a human barrier. But what I would recommend in that situation, have a point contact, yourself or whomever, that if there is that situation, the estranged parent shows up, that was the perfect thing to do. Go up there and head off the situation before it ever becomes a situation. Have a point person to do that. So if somebody does, maybe somebody has inside information, maybe you don't, or somebody else doesn't, but they see a potential problem, to go to the point person and say, okay, this is the deal going on. Let's take care of it before it becomes a problem. But just human barriers are, to me, without actually going and building a fence and making it look like a prison, it's just human barriers, 4 or 5 people. On Wednesday nights with our children, oftentimes they will go outside and honestly, just to get them to stretch their legs and take some of the sugar away from them. We'll have certain people go out and we'll keep them contained in an area. But we've had over years, we've had potential threats of estranged parents and even grandparents. We're blessed. We have a big gymnasium, so we just put them in the gym to do that. But if we can take them outside, we just kind of surround them and just create a human barrier around our kids. They don't know it. They don't know what we're doing, but we're watching the perimeter. We're watching all the things going on around us. But kind of where we're at, we're on the far west end of Baxter. There's really nothing out there, just a few houses and stuff. It's not a heavily area, so it's easier for us to do that. But just a human barrier and find a point of contact within that group to say, if there's a problem, go to so-and-so, identify the problem, let them deal, and let one person, because what you don't want to do, you don't want 2 or 3 people to go up into a situation because you've escalated a situation that probably doesn't need to be escalated. Usually one person typically can handle that if it's done the right way. And it's really, everything's about communication. It's all about communication. When I teach de-escalation training, it's all about communication. That's all de-escalation is to de-escalate, and it's done through communication. If you do it the right way, you can really curtail a lot of potential problems. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. But that would be my recommendation. Human barrier works really good in those situations. Yes, ma'am.
So, say the worst thing happens and it happens, what is the kind of protocol that happens? How do we know when the police department comes in here? How do they know that we're not active shooter? I mean, kind of what.
Yeah, Scott mentioned that the other night for us. Scott, why don't you-
Scott, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to return to Scott. How he approaches the aftermath of an active shooter. I know how we respond. I'm sure Scott's going to be the same way.
Whenever we get that call, Scott, we need to hear you.
Welcome, brother. Welcome.
I've always been said I have a big mouth, but
Yeah, apparently ours ain't big enough, brother.
what we're trying to do, when we get that call and it comes in to us, we're going to have law enforcement officers from multiple jurisdictions respond. I know pretty near everybody's sitting in this room, but the sheriff's office may not, Highway Patrol may not, Cherokee County will respond over here for us, Craig County will come up out of Oklahoma to help us. What I always tell my people when I teach active shooter training is, Jay said, go out this door. Excellent. I mean, comes in that way, you guys go this way. When we're coming, what we want you to do is you're coming out, hands up, fingers spread. Because we're trained to watch the hands. Because the hands are what do us harms. So when you're exiting the building, arms up, fingers spread, and do exactly what you're told to do. If you're told to get on the ground, get on the ground. If you're told to go over to the oak tree on the corner and wait there, do that. I may stop somebody. If I'm coming in, I may grab somebody to try to gather as much information as I can before I come in. The days of surrounding a structure and waiting on a specialized unit to respond, those went away with Columbine. Now the first officer that arrives on scene, if it's me, I'm coming in, okay? And I'm going to drive to the threat, and I'm going to neutralize the threat. So I'll step past you. I will step over people that are injured down because I have to get to the threat. So make sure that we don't see you as a threat. Best way to do that, arms up, fingers spread.
And also, Scott, if I may.
Yeah.
If I may add to that, exactly what I would have told him, Scott, obviously. Here's the beautiful part about law enforcement training. It's all the same training. I don't care where you go to work. If I go to work at Sutapa PD, Scott would have to give me what he does policy procedure-wise, but as far as everything else, I know what to do. I've been trained that way. Scott's the KLATC guy. KLT, which is Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center in Hatch, is where we all go to get certified. It's where I got my certification. But I want to talk about inside the church. Not everybody may not be able to egress out of the church. You get on the ground, you get prone, and you get your hands behind your head. As Scott says, if I'm responding from Cherokee County, I don't know any of you. I know 2 people in this room. 3, Scott. The rest of you, I have no idea who you are. I don't know who the bad guy or the good guy is, or woman. just, we don't make an assumption that it's a guy. It very well could be easily a woman. If you're in this church, when you hear law enforcement approach, get on the ground, get on your belly, get your hands behind your head, lock your fingers in and lay there. They will do the assessment at that point. And they do it very quickly, but then as Scott says, hands up, fingers spread, get out, get as far away as you can. I promise you at that point, officers will be giving you instructions of what they want you to do. But if you're outside there, inside, get on the ground, get your hands behind your head, so that way the incoming officers know where the threat is. Because we storm now. We don't surround, we storm. But great question is, how do the police know you're not the bad guy? Well, those two things will go a long way protecting you, because if they see you as a posed threat, guess what they're going to do? They're going to neutralize the threats. You don't want that to happen. Mm-hmm. And because, they will, because the bad guy or girl could be injured. Because what the police don't know is there may be somebody within the church that hit targets, and the suspect may be down. So there's so many things that's going on. It's a rapidly moving dynamic situation, as we call them. Sound familiar, Scott? And they just don't know. So they're going to assume that everybody in this church is the threat.
Especially if you have a gun.
Yeah. To me, here's what I would do, even in my church. If that would happen, the first thing I would do is I would get rid of my weapon away from me. Get away from it. Then after the aftermath, I can say, yeah, I got a Ruger 380. Here's the serial number. And they can go find my gun. And if there was rounds exchanged, the bad guys said they're going to need to know that anyway, because they're going to do ballistics testing. They're going to do all of this. So, but get away from your weapon and just like I said, get away from it, get your hands, get on your belly, and just do what they tell you to do. And it may sound like an eternity, it will feel like an eternity, but it will be very quick. They'll figure out real quick who the threat is, and then they'll take you from there. Anybody else? Brother?
Should arm people in the church in front, or officers, and let them know who's acting in the church, so they will know if they have to come to something like that?
That would be very difficult because it is such a rapidly dynamic. Scott, I want you to jump on this as well. To approach the officers as they're coming into an active shooter, to let them know who's weaponed in the church. Here's my concern. That is a rapid, dynamic, evolving situation. And what happens, let me give you a little bit of cop thought process, okay? Because I've got to get to the threat. I would train your people in your church as everybody if you're
Just like everybody else, okay? Our vision is going to come down, and we're looking for one thing and one thing only. I may stop you